to talk about healthcare. With me, we have three panelists: Kevin Murphy, Greg Ventura, and we have Elizabeth Rogers. And I'm going to let them go into their background. We also have Lynn Flanagan, who is my technology wingman. Could you see if you could start that poll that asks what major students are in, just so the panelists can get a feel for who's here? Awesome. So students, if you want to just like select what your major is, I think that will help our panelists get a feel for where they might want to steer the conversation, if possible.
I have 83% voted right now. Just let me know when you want me to end it.
So, you know, we're probably being counted in that remaining. So you can end that, and, you know, and that's fine. So panelists, or can everybody see this?
Yes.
Okay, fine. So you get a feel for, we've got some accounting, some finance. Supply chain is the largest percent, but, you know, management, marketing. So you've got a representation, you know, across 5 different disciplines here, which is, I think, a good thing for you guys to know. So I thought the way we would kick it off is I will just turn it over to each of the panelists. And if you could take, you know, 5, 6, 8 minutes, something like that, talk about yourself, your background, your education, your work experiences, where you've worked in the past, what you're currently working on now, or where you're working now, what your role is now, and just kind of provide the students with some background into your specific areas of expertise and interest. Is number one. And actually, you know what? I got to back up. I need to remind everybody we are going to record this session, just so you know. If you have questions, please put them in the chat room. And I mean, that's specifically for students. This is all for you. So as you're listening to the panelists speak, any questions you might want to get into with them, a little bit deeper information on something, just please put that in the chat room or in the chat box, and we will get back to that. I want to leave 15, 20 minutes at the end to be able to answer any questions that the students have. Okay, I think that was everything I was required to say from a public service standpoint. So let's start with Kevin. If you want to introduce yourself and, you know, share with the students what your background is.
So Brian, it's a risk. I'm of Irish heritage myself, and asking an Irishman to talk about himself may last more than an hour here, so I'll try to be brief. Hi, I'm Kevin Murphy. I am a senior vice president with CVS. I'm responsible for all the what we call our healthcare and pharmacy reimbursement across our 9,900 stores. I've been in the role just under 2 years. I came out of our specialty pharmaceutical business, where we grew that business to be the largest specialty pharmacy in the country. Prior to that, I did an acquisition for CVS of Quorum Health Services. That's sending nurses into the homes to do home infusion. And then prior to that, I was asked to do an evaluation of a company in North Carolina where I was president and led a turnaround and integrated that company. It was called Accordant into CVS broadly. So had a number of different experiences over my 10 years at CVS. In my past life, I've done everything from been in a managed care company back early on, where we took that company public. I also worked in with a PBM called Medco at the time, where I had a number of different roles. And then for a brief period of time, I led the Northeast practice for Mercer's pharmacy practice across the country, which is the largest pharmacy practice in the U.S. So, you know, had a variety of different experiences. Obviously graduated from URI and a BS in business management, and then went on to get my master's in finance at Fairfield University early on in my career. So that's a little bit about me.
Great, thank you. Go ahead, Greg.
Good morning. My name's Greg Ventura. I think I've met a lot of you over time. I've been at Charter Care about 4 years. Led all distribution and buying about a team of 22 through the pandemic. We have spent about 60 million. We do all the contracts, capital, new product sourcing, anything you can think of when a surgeon needs something for surgery to purchase services and environmental and basic med surg supplies. I've been in my career about 20 years. Started in accounting. We didn't have supply chain back then. I went to Assumption College, then went to Bryan for my master's. I actually got involved with URI actually through Brian and actually Joe Estrella at the time. I started off in Stop and Shop and retail as a category manager, a category buyer, went over to CVS, did some inventory work, and then kind of, you never plan your career, today's career day. So you never plan your career, you kind of fall into careers. I knew someone that worked at Bar Dayball. I worked there for a few years, and then with that medical device experience, I got into hospitals. I never thought I would work at a hospital, but I've been in the hospital industry about 5 years. So it's been definitely a unique challenge going through the pandemic. I have done a presentation in Brian's class. I won't do it now. And I've spoken to a lot of you either through networking or some of the other events after our board. I do serve on the board as the chairman here with URI, partnering with the professor, a lot of the alumni. I do encourage all of you to reach out. This is going to go very quickly through LinkedIn or reach out to me for any questions. Just real quick, for me, it was quite the experience going through this year, going through supplier relationships, sourcing, dual sourcing, international shipments, safety stock, and the importance going through the pandemic, and also how the work experience has changed working with supplier reps, either in the ORs or outside the ORs. So I can go through that a little bit. I encourage all of you, I think not just CVS, pharmacy, biomed, medical equipment, medical device, there's so much growth in this area in Boston, if not Minnesota and California. I would really encourage you to look at healthcare roles. They're not going away, they're only growing. Aging population, from cancer research to a lot of things. So, but I'll open it up to any questions after introductions, anything on the hospital industry, pandemic, and I'm happy to be here. Thank you, Brian.
Hey, Greg, thank you. All right. Last but not least, my father would be counseling me right now for not leading off with Elizabeth, and lady should have gone first. So I apologize, Dad. I'm sorry. But Liz, why don't you go ahead and give us some of your background?
Sounds good. Thank you. So I work currently as an account manager at Mind Plus Matter. So that is a marketing agency, and we specialize in serving pharmaceutical clients. And in particular, we do a lot of product launches, so new products to the market. So to give a little bit of background of how I got here, I graduated from URI in 2017, and I had studied marketing and film media while at URI. I had gotten an internship, and then that led to a full-time position at Nail Communications in Providence after college, where I worked as a project manager. In that role, I did a lot of resourcing and such, worked with our clients as that one face-to-face contact. And I worked on a bunch of varied clients. So I worked on a university rebranding, Rhode Island tourism at one point, worked on a small project with Bose, their innovation lab. So the reason I say that is because even if you have an industry that you're really interested in, I think it's also helpful to understand how, business in multiple different industries work to be able to apply it to whatever one you're interested in. In terms of my healthcare experience there, I worked with Lifespan, which many of you probably know, being in Rhode Island. It's a large healthcare network throughout the state. And then also Floating Hospital, which is Tough Medical Centers Children's Hospital up in Boston. I think it's now Tufts Children's Hospital. I believe they just renamed. So with both of those clients, we worked on a whole gamut of materials for them, including broadcast TV spots, print, digital, social, and just creating the creative concepts for them, and then executing the production of those campaigns. I think what I really enjoyed working for both of those clients on was projects where you get to really be in communication with the patients. and be able to tell their story and bring products to them and services that really were going to change their lives. I think that's the cool thing about the healthcare space, is that you do have a real opportunity to make it matter for people, for their lives. So I worked there for 2 years. I unfortunately got laid off in 2019, and then I ended up finding this new job in Boston at Mind Plus Matter as an account manager, and I've been here for about a year and 5 months or so. And when I started, I knew nothing about the pharmaceutical space, and I think that hopefully that's encouraging. That even if you don't know anything, coming out of college, URI prepares you, especially the College of Business, with a lot of great skills to be able to transfer to whatever role you take on. And so the pharmaceutical, or just the healthcare world, has a lot of acronyms, and there's a lot of like very intricate details of language and such that I've found. But by just building on the basis I had for my previous role and some healthcare experience, I was able to take this role on. So since being here, I've been able to work on the product launch for a first to market oral therapy for a rare disease called hereditary angioedema that causes swelling attacks in patients. So we, in the past year leading up to last December, when we got FDA approval of the drug, we worked through all of the marketing materials that were needed for it, including the site development for the product itself, and the brochures or materials that an HCP, healthcare provider, or a patient might need to understand their treatment options, their disease options, and such. And so when we do a lot of our marketing around this space, there oftentimes are those two audiences that you do want to consider, and figure out like what are the barriers to treatment, or the barriers to them understanding your product, because they're very different perspectives. And so we think a lot about that patient journey, or that doctor journey, and where we can provide messaging and content that's going to help to support them in their best decision. So so far, I've really loved this role, and I don't think it's my ideal role just yet, but I think one piece of advice I would give in general is that whatever direction you go, just move in a direction, take that first job, and then from there, it oftentimes guides you into figuring out what you like and don't like. Yeah, and I think really the healthcare space, there's a lot of, as you probably would imagine, there's a lot of regulations and such. And so I think that in a lot of ways is one of the biggest learning curves with this space. But, I think you take your background that you have, you apply it as best you can, and you ask a lot of questions. That's always a key thing.
Okay, awesome. So I'm going to reiterate again, we've gotten a little bit of overview on the three panelists and what their background is. So I'm just saying, students, right? If you have questions, start getting them like into that chat room. So if I could like high level summarize here, right? Because I wasn't sure outside of Greg, right, exactly what everybody's, role or career path was. So it's almost like we could almost cover the gamut of healthcare here, where, Kevin, you were initially involved in some home delivery. Now you're doing, more of the financial payment side of it. Greg, you buy this stuff, and then Liz, you sell or market the stuff. So there's almost across the three of you, every discipline that is within the College of Business is being touched in some shape, way, or form, right? So I just point that out for students. So no matter what your discipline or your college career path is, I mean, there's something here that should be of interest to you. So again, you can start formulating those questions, get them in the chat room. So let me go back to the panelists. And you know what? I'm going to reverse the order here because like Dad taught me. How have you seen your industry change over the last year as a result of COVID? And do you think that's going in for whatever changes occurred? Are they full-time changes that this will now be our new way of doing business? Or do you envision that, we get over the COVID hump and you kind of, I hate saying go back to the way it was before, because I don't know that it will always be that way, but I'm trying to get is a permanent shift or a temporary shift in response to COVID, or maybe what it is that you do was not necessarily, impacted, by COVID. So Liz, if you want to, share any thoughts that you have on that, and you know what, and I do this in class all the time. I'm sorry, I'm like almost interrupting before you even talk. I loved your comment about you don't really know where your career path's gonna like take you, so just like get on the horse and start riding, and you'll get somewhere, which is absolutely 100% true. So now I'll stop.
Great. So let's see, things that are permanent or temporary shifts. I think one of the big things that businesses in general are realizing is that a lot of the work can be done virtual. Whereas before, I mean, I remember when I first started at this role for a couple months in the office, it used to be looked down upon to work from home on Fridays. And now we know we can do it. And I'm still working from home virtually. I can go into the office, but there are maybe 5 people out of 100 that go in ever. So it's definitely a realization that there can be a lot more flexibility in your workday. Um, in terms of I guess the industry that we've had to change a little bit, one thing, and just as an example, that has changed quite drastically, we do a lot of booth development for congresses. So it's professional, like doctor conferences, where the pharma companies will have large scale booths. And normally that's, a very extensive, like physical build process. And all of that has gone virtually. So we had a couple virtual conferences with this client, one back in November, one in February. And I think, it's just a time where you do have to, I hate this word because everybody uses it now, but you have to pivot and you have to learn how to adjust to the times and learn new skills. A lot of the conferences were learning things as we were learning it, like in conjunction. But we built this whole virtual booth where you can move around. It was hosted on third-party site. You can move around within the space. And that was just a whole new take that we had never done before in this agency, and a lot of people just haven't. But it was really exciting. And so I think it does give you new opportunities to creatively problem solve. I think a lot of times the most creative ideas come from times when you have those largest challenges and barriers. So that is a way we've been able to pivot. I think just as that, following that example, I don't think conferences are going to be fully in person moving forward. I do think there will be that in-person piece and component, but I think it is going to be married with some virtual component as well, because a lot of conferences are realizing their attendance is super high because people who previously had barriers to attending in person could not. So there's definitely things like that where I do think there will be a hybrid approach moving forward, and that's not necessarily bad. I think it can provide access in a way that it couldn't before. I think in terms of just thinking about like marketing in particular and the way that we reach, or think about our patients or our doctors, that all has changed a little bit too, because their experiences and their journey through their treatment and whatnot has changed as well, in the way that telehealth has adapted. So all of these things we have to consider as we're thinking about marketing to these audiences. But I do think there's going to be a lot of hybrid models moving forward, no matter what it is.
Okay, interesting. So like for all you marketing students out there, I'm just curious, what was the feedback from the participants in your virtual conference, and what they got out of it and the benefit and all of that versus how they felt historically about physically attending the trade shows and walking through the booths and all of that other stuff? I'm just curious what they thought about that platform. I'm asking you that, Liz.
Sorry, I didn't know if you're asking students. So I definitely think there's components that are missing. You can't, oftentimes what happens is we have sales reps who are staffing the booth. So normally there's more of an opportunity to draw people into the booth if they're walking by and they might not have stopped, but there's that physical interaction. We did have like a chat component within the booth, and it didn't get a ton of interaction. So you're definitely missing some of that piece. But on the data collection side, you get a lot more data when you have a virtual experience versus previously in the physical booth, you have to have people sign up with their emails. The way a lot of the virtual platforms are created is, by entering the booth virtually, you are providing access to your email for people to reach out to. So it gives us an opportunity to follow up with all of those people to say, hey, thanks for coming to our booth. Here's some more information. So it kind of changes some of the takeaways that we're able to get from it. I think on the doctor's side, there's definitely more improvement that we can do to make sure that their experience, they're getting that like one-to-one interaction in the same way or a similar way that you might get it in person.
I will say my collection of quizzes has dropped dramatically since we stopped going to conferences. So that little like, hey, get me into your booth thing. All right, Greg. So I'm just going in reverse order here. COVID impact, short-term, long-term changes, impacts?
Yeah, so obviously, for 3 or 4 months, if you know your loved ones or you're in the industry, I mean, the surgery was shut down for 3 or 4 months. So that's the bread and butter of all hospitals. So, and that had an effect on all the suppliers out there, and then it has an effect on overall business. The difference in the hospital industry for finance and accounting is it's not like retail where you can raise your prices if your costs go up. It's based on insurance reimbursement. So the hospital industry, the union pushes wages, the wages are going up, the buildings are going up, the cost of raw materials went up because of all the raw materials, and you've heard stories of the gloves and the gowns and the shields, and all the costs are going up. So all the costs are going up in the hospital industry, but the reimbursement goes down, especially in Rhode Island. So that model is a tough model financially. Hospitals are struggling right now for capital investments. They're working with federal and state grants. We probably spent over $2 million in a very small hospital on just PPE and stuff. I've talked about that a little in Brian's meetings. I think the good thing about when I went home to watch CNN, I mean, I don't care if you're a finance, accounting major, but especially supply chain, they talked about it a lot, the business aspect, the governmental aspect of what happened in the pandemic. Since this is career day, just a little touch upon it. I mean, obviously we're all sitting here virtually. I'm on Zoom calls all day. I don't necessarily go on the video, but we're on calls all day. So there is a lot of piece you can work from home, but I still think that personal relationship with a doctor or a surgeon, or if you're in leadership or you need to have a discussion, still has to be had. So that won't go away. So I just urge the students, if it's an internship or a job, it might not always be work from home, especially when you're early on in your career, you have to build those relationships. So there has been some friction, and there's some times where our staff is in intense, stressful situations. It's important to walk over and have those conversations. And then just overall, I just think the impact of the pandemic is going to affect all the students on this call, and it doesn't matter the major. I can always talk offline about that. And then from an interviewing perspective, it's still important to network. I've gotten all of my jobs. I've been through layoffs. I've been through restructuring. It's so important to build that LinkedIn and build that list. We don't have supplier cards anymore. Everything's on LinkedIn, but have coffee with someone, go have lunch with someone. I know you guys can't do it virtually, but it's coming. It's coming in the fall, in the spring. It could be at a cookout or something, and somebody's a vice president or something. So continue to network, and I hope that pandemic doesn't affect you networking. I don't care if it's a phone call. I don't care if it's a coffee 6 feet away with your mask on. Do it. And I think my only other advice for today and how the pandemic is, when you come into interview, it might be in person or it might be virtually. So be careful of what's in the background, be careful what's going on. You can only control it so much. You go in person, you might have to interview with a mask on, and eye contact and the way you I'm reading your body even more with a mask on because I can't see you smiling. I can't see you how you articulate yourself. It's important in interviews, and I've had several for internship. When you come in, it doesn't mean you're not professionally dressed and you're still going to have a mask on. You still have to be prepared. The only other thing I would say from a healthcare industry, don't come in and say, I applied because I really would love to treat patients and make people better. In supply chain finance accounting, our customers are the people that are the nurses and doctors and leadership doing the job. We don't treat patients. So come in and understand the specialty at the hospital, understand what the doctors are doing, understand if we have a home care, a cancer center, what the doctors are doing. If you're interviewing with Kevin or Elizabeth, you're understanding their LinkedIn background and you're understanding what they do, what they specifically do. Don't read me a mission and vision statement that you just read 2 minutes ago. Understand the specialties of what CVS or Elizabeth or any of the companies do. That's my only advice. I've had people come in to interview with me that don't know if we're a profit or a nonprofit, who we're owned by, what we do, what specialties we do, and what kind of surgeries we have. So that's my only speech, Brian. I kind of went on a tangent, but that's my speech for Career Day on how I'm bringing it back and the importance of healthcare in interviewing and networking in this industry.
No sweat, Greg. I can manage your tangents. It's not a problem. So, I mean, one thing, Greg did mention, though, is, impacts of COVID. Yes, things have changed, but that does not mean that the opportunities are not out there. They are out there. In fact, for many majors, I would say they're out there in a greater, there's greater demand now than there was before. So it's just, I'm going to use Liz's word now. You're going to have to pivot, right? The way that you went about that a year ago is going to be a little bit different than it is right now, but it does not mean that the opportunities are not out there. I know recent graduates that have left their position, interviewed, got accepted in a new company, have been extremely successful for the last 8 months and have never physically yet met one of their coworkers. And it is like 100% online. You can do it. Okay. I mean, you can do it. You just got to prepare yourself for it. All right, Kevin, impacts COVID had, good, bad, short-term, long-term?
Sure, a couple of things. So one is Greg's advice is spot on in a lot of areas, and that the only thing I would disagree with Greg is that I'm in retail healthcare, and my reimbursement pressure is over $1 billion a year. So, just to give you a kind of context, right now I'm responsible for just over $68 billion in annual revenue for CVS. And it comes in two fashions. One is the pharmaceuticals themselves, the prescription drugs. The other is what we had started on a journey just a little while ago, and it's frankly why I was moved into the retail shop, is because we're building these healthcare destinations. You've seen MinuteClinic out there inside of CVS for a while, but we're building a broader healthcare experience inside of the stores. And so we were down the path of driving that. Now, what COVID has done is created a sense of urgency and speed and innovation that is, at a much faster pace than ever before. You think about that, both we've all talked about virtual. You've seen virtual care grow 2,000% in the year 2020. But you also need to then create the digital experience. And most importantly in healthcare, one of the things about healthcare and why there's so much opportunity in healthcare is there's so many gaps in the system. And so when we start thinking about virtual and digital, what we need to do is help close those gaps. And that is what's creating tremendous opportunity for people coming out of school these days, is because as you think about your experience in growing up, how many of the folks on this call actually used a pay telephone in their lifetime? Okay, right? So now we're sitting in a situation where we are rapidly innovating across the business. And so it gets a little more difficult. In person, it is very, very effective way of communicating. But you have to learn to communicate differently. And the way I think about it is, we've now, the word pivot keeps coming up. We're doing, hundreds of thousands of COVID vaccines every day. You cannot do it without this tool. You cannot get your vaccine without this tool. If you look at it, just 2 years ago, you filled out a piece of paper inside a pharmacy to get your vaccine. And so you think about what that means going forward is a speed to market, an ease of use, a better customer experience. All those things fit inside of healthcare. Because at the end of the day, healthcare, you are still a consumer. It's still a consumer experience, a patient experience, and the like. And so when you think about your career, Liz kind of talked about her, what she's responsible for, right? So that I call is, your span of control. What do you control in your role? Greg talked about networking. That's your sphere of influence. If you think about it visually, your span of control is fairly tightly narrow. Your sphere of influence should be very, very wide. And that is what's going to drive your opportunities in career. I'll give you my personal example. Recently, I was doing the turnaround for CVS in a company with nurses that worked in very rare diseases, anywhere from Lou Gehrig's to lupus. And as I was successful in turning that operation around, the organization reached out to me and said, we want you to consider a strategy around home infusion, a business that frankly I knew nothing about. And in a period of time, not only did I build the strategy for the board of directors, I was able to then lead the organization in the acquisition of that company. And then I led the integration of that company into the business model that we had. And I would not have been able to do that if I didn't have a sphere of influence across the organization that allowed me to connect multiple people and multiple dots across the organization. So as you think about that during COVID, we're going to come out of COVID, knock on wood for everyone. I watch what the supply looks like every day. We had our largest vaccination day yesterday inside of CVS retail. We're going to exceed over 10 million shots, in the next couple of days. And so if you think about what that means is that you've now got tools that frankly early in our careers, we didn't have. You have ways to connect. I mean, LinkedIn is a couple of years old, right? It's or a decade old now. But the reality is you've got more opportunities or more tools in your tool chest. And I remember my dad telling me it's only a poor carpenter that blames his tools. So you've got more tools in your tool chest. You got to use them and to be effective. And look at the idea of building your sphere of influence. So Brian, share it back with you.
So, thank you, Kevin. You made me, when you said how many of you used a payphone, right? My oldest daughter, who is 31, showed me this YouTube not that long ago of putting a rotary phone in front of teenagers and asking them to dial it, and they wouldn't, do this. They would just, punching the number. Like, and you had to see it, but I mean, I was dying, right? The same way, like, did you ever have a TV without a remote control? Man, when I was a kid, I had to get up and change the channel. Oh my God, that's like 15 feet you got to walk, right? Okay, so I'm going to, students, you need to get some questions in this chat box. So I'm going to ask the panel another question, and I'm going into professor mode quickly. If you guys don't start asking questions, I'm going to start drawing the questions out from you. So realistically here, right, you should be taking advantage of the expertise that these three panelists have and the experiences they have to share with you, right? This is your opportunity to ask. So why they are, okay, questions are coming in, excellent. So why these questions are coming into the queue, to my three panelists. Is there one thing that you wish you did differently as you were getting yourself to preparing yourself to like launch into your career that in hindsight you said, geez, I really wish I did X. So let's reverse it again. So I'll go right back to Kevin.
I don't think I'd say I have any regrets in anything that I would had done or change. I think the reality is that I think, as I think of my experiences over the years, is that I would say I would have been much more open to change. And what I learned, probably a couple of years into my career, is that taking risks in unknown areas is actually a great opportunity for growth, because you get to a sense where you're comfortable and you're knowledgeable. When you become a domain expert in deep knowledge, right, you tend to get very comfortable in that position. And what I would say is embracing that idea that being uncomfortable really actually creates greater opportunity for growth.
Need to unmute. I like that idea. I mean, you need to be, if you're always in a comfortable environment, then you're not challenging yourself. You could question that your organization is not challenging you either. So a little uncomfortableness with a good support structure, right, is a healthy thing. Greg.
Just really quickly, I think, again, your first job, you're going to build a job based on, you're going to pick a good company that's growing, that has opportunities. You should always pick somebody that you want to work for, that you want to emulate as a boss, that'll develop you and guide you in your career. But most of the time, you just got to pay the bills and pay the mortgage or pay the rent, and you got to start working, get out there, like Liz said. I do like what Kevin said on relationships. I think early on in my career, I was right out of school, you're still young and you're doing your thing. It's so important to build some tenure in your career, some depth of knowledge, and build those relationships. I jumped around a little earlier in my career, for good or for bad. You make more money when you jump around, but that's not always everything you would like. Now in my career, I would like to build 4, 5, 6 years in a company. Some of it's not planned. I got laid off once in my career, and you think it's the worst thing in the world, and you build for it, and you grow professionally and personally. But for all of you I think it's going to be more common, but I encourage you to, especially that first job, first couple of jobs, build those 2 or 3 years, build some tenure on your resume. The worst thing you can have, and I had to overcome it, is have in your first 10 years, have 10 jobs. And you really want to build that first 2 or 3 years. So pick a company, not just based on they're going to pay you 53 grand or 49 grand. It's not a big difference. Do the math. But look at the opportunity based on the company, the growth, and especially, number one, you have to like who you're going to report to. That person has to support you and grow you professionally and challenge you. I've also, you interview for a job and you love the manager, and then 3 months down the road they leave or restructure and you work for somebody else. You have to be able to adapt and grow in your career and work for different people and different styles. And I always grabbed one thing out of my manager that I loved and that I would copy going forward. But I also looked at my manager and said, I would never do that. I didn't like that, but we'll work with it. And then you learn from it and you build your own management professional style over time. And then I think that's the biggest thing I've learned in my career, Brian, with more experience. You kind of build yourself and how you want to act professionally and personally, and you kind of grow in that first 10, 15 years. But that's probably my advice for today, Brian.
Okay. Liz, if you had something you really wish you could have done earlier in your career. I mean, I realize you're still earlier in your career than the other two panelists, but geez, I really wish I did this while I was in college.
I feel like I did take advantage of mostly what I could in college, but I guess just to build on just some learnings along the way and stuff I want to do more of. When I got to my first job, I I think I didn't put my voice in as much in conversations and meetings, because there's always that doubt coming out of college if you really know what you're talking about, and everybody else in the room has had 10 years of plus experience and they must know. And I don't know if anybody can relate to that feeling, but I would highly encourage, as an entry level position person, there's a lot of leeway, and people know that you're new and they know that you're just learning. And so it's totally okay to ask a lot of questions. It's totally okay to not be right. But you have to do it with a sense of humility, right? And you need to ask the questions, make sure you get your answers in order to do your job, but also be smart about it too, and make sure you're doing your kind of research on the back end, if there's answers you can find on your own as well. So I guess that little piece is something that I would do more of, and I'm working on doing more of in my own career, but wish I would have done a little bit more when I first started. And I think the only other thing, and kind of echoes kind of what you were saying about being okay with being uncomfortable. I think you do get comfortable in roles after a year or two, depending on what it is, and it's important to just know when to move on, when the company that you're at might not have all of the opportunities that you're looking for. And in those moments, reach out to new people on LinkedIn, reach out to your network, and just start picking people's brains. And I think as I'm growing in my career, I'm trying to find ways to do that. Even though I'm not looking for a new job, there's always, it's always good to keep that in the back of your mind, just to keep broadening that network of people that you know.
Awesome. Thank you. All right, so I'm going to start scrolling through some of these questions, and I may bounce around. So there's one question here to all the panelists. How do you make the most out of college, for example, in preparing for the workforce? So I'm going to give you my 2 cents first and then ask the panelists to chime in. In my opinion, I think prospective employers are looking for well-rounded students, not just the 4.0 CUME, all right? You got the 4.0 GPA, awesome, and I said this in the last session. But then if you go home and like bury yourself in the dorm for the next 4 years and you never come out, then you are not going to be as an attractive a candidate to a prospective employer as if your CUME was, let's say, 3.6, but you did volunteer work and you were engaged in this club and you did things on this activity and you were part of this committee and you had an internship and you did all of these other things that demonstrates to employers that you are willing to sometimes step out of that comfort zone, that you are able to collaborate and plan and coordinate with other people, that you are engaging, that you are, proactive in some things, and that you've got a personality that is engaging for their organization. They look at all of those things. So while your educational results are certainly a big piece while you are in college, all of those other ancillary things round you into or make you the person that you become, and employers look for those things, period. I will stop there. Panelists want to add to that?
Hey, Brian, it's a good point. I want to just kind of stress something, and it's a little bit of a soapbox issue for me. So if you think about, you come into the workforce with a set of, you took these courses, you got this GPA, and frankly, you participated in things. I would tell you the single biggest skill that everyone on this call should and work on, it's communication. Particularly more important now in situations like we're here with Zoom, okay? Because at the end of the day, if you think about becoming a leader, you have to be able to communicate and connect with folks. And that means verbal, writing, otherwise. And so it really becomes an investment in yourself if you work on your communication skills. Go take a liberal arts class around writing, because what you're going to see is that you're going to be able to tell a story. You're going to be able to connect the dots for the organization. I talked a little bit about sphere of influence. You are able to expand your sphere of influence the more you're able to communicate ideas. The best leaders that I've ever worked with are people who are excellent storytellers and can communicate effectively both verbally and in writing. And so being able to communicate, it really boils the ocean down for everybody on this call. That's going to make you leapfrog in your career, connecting the dots from what you do today to what's important for the organization and what meets the corporate vision for those organizations.
Sorry, I was on mute. Liz or Greg, you got anything you want to add to that? Best prepare yourself in college for the workforce outside of what you've already said.
Liz, you want me? Go ahead, Liz.
I don't have too much to add. I think you guys covered it pretty well.
Brian, the only other thing, and I feel like we've said this a lot over the URI through Business 390 and all the career events we do, but when I look at a resume, I would like to see some kind of Six Sigma project, green belt, yellow belt. You're all doing a lot of them in junior, senior year. Excel, I'm going to ask you Excel if you can do a VLOOKUP and formulas and in that piece. Don't just say you soared in one class 2 years ago. Projects, I would like to hear about one project you're really proud of at URI. Doesn't matter if it's a Brian Walsh or Joe Estrella or any of the other professors, something you're really proud of that you did a project that you can take me through, but not just that, the results, the financial results, the lead time results, the cost savings. Obviously, we're looking for internships and any kind of clubs and activities like Brian said. I would not put I'm proud of you guys that you're doing part-time jobs on top of school, but I really don't look at them. So I would reduce that on your resume. And if you don't have an internship and you don't have a lot to talk about, put a project that you're really excited about. At least it's something for me to talk to in the resume to get you guys thinking. I think URI, and I'm gonna speak on behalf of URI in a way. I think you guys do more than Brian students. I've interviewed Brian students. I've interviewed Providence College, Rhode Island College, and Salve. All of you are taking some kind of Six Sigma or Excel classes. That's part of it. You're all doing some kind of projects. And URI is very big on the internship. So this kind of career day is not as developed in other schools. So I think everybody on this call, just by listening, if you're listening, this is a big step and just keep building that LinkedIn. But Brian, I think all of that builds, and I would encourage you guys to get out there. I don't care if it's unpaid, paid, it's a small project, some kind of part-time job, do something in your career this summer, this spring, whatever you guys got to do.
All right. Another question again for anyone on the panel. How do you see the industry developing post-COVID with respect to supplier relations? So, I mean, you think about it you've got suppliers you deal. I mean, it could be suppliers you buy from. It could be suppliers that, well, those would be customers. But you know what? I'm not going to try and interpret. I'll stop because I'm babbling, right? So post-COVID supplier relations.
So I'll go first, Brian. I think in the supplier relations side, what you've seen is a little bit of a shift in that suppliers now need to be problem solvers, not just here's the product and manage the price and the of the product and some of the logistics. You need to now solve some unique business problems. Those that do. Help solve unique business problems. You think about, Greg, you probably faced this in PPE, right? So when we were looking at PPE, the shortage of supply, the whole China, supply chain, all those challenges. So partnering and creating unique solutions becomes really, really, that didn't exist before, even though they were a trusted supplier. I think that's really where you're going to see some differentiation with suppliers going forward. And then ultimately, as Greg mentioned, in healthcare, we're all facing this reimbursement pressure to drop prices. And in reality, that creates enormous, margin pressure for suppliers. Well, those suppliers who come up with unique solutions that lower other costs really then are able to maintain their gross margins and solve some big issues for organizations.
Greg, Liz, any additional comments about supply relations?
The only other thing is I think like Kevin mentioned, there was all this pressure in China and getting supplies, and I want to keep it to more career day, but I think suppliers are catching up now. At beginning, we were reaching out to all kinds of crazy suppliers. People were making stuff out of their basement. So it was important for us to vet where the suppliers is counterfeit stuff out there and everything else. But I think from a career perspective, suppliers are reinventing themselves. They're going to new areas they didn't. I do think some new companies have kind of gone from, they used to do printing to now they're importing supplies. So that's good and bad in many ways. But there's other jobs out there. There's other research going on. So, but in terms of the relationships, I just, again, it's just more Zoom calls and stuff. But at the end of the day, a lot of it goes to dollars. So there's some companies that you might do a bid, you might never meet the buyer. There's not a lot of junkets and breakfasts and lunches and dinners that go on anymore. I know CVS did away with them, and now it's almost like a Walmart motto where you're putting in bids. Hospitals are doing bids. So sometimes as a salesperson or marketing, you might never meet that buyer. And that's a little more challenging when you're making a presentation. It's not always based on relationships. And the only other thing I want to touch upon is on that question, Brian, from Anthony Cabral on who I know. But for if you want to become a manager or supervisor, I think it goes back to what Kevin says. You're going to build your breadth of experience, build your relationship and your expertise. But sometimes, honestly, I always struggle with this, and I don't think it's changed. How is a college student supposed to get a supervisor or manager experience if you've never been a manager? So, and it's just a person taking a shot at you. And I worked at Stop and Shops at night, and I had union members and people, and I struggled for a couple of years. I was thrown into it. Somebody took a shot at me, and it was hard for me to manage a 20-year-old, and it was hard for me to manage the 60-year-old meat manager that was the head of the union. And what would a 21-year-old, 22-year-old right out of school know about being a manager? And I had to learn quick, I'll be honest, from discipline to things and security. So I like that question, not because I know who it came from, but I like the question because, guys, just take a shot. Struggle through your first career. You're not going to get all that experience in school. You kind of just get thrown into it and figure it out. So I wish you the best. So I like
Hey,
that
Greg,
question,
Greg, you mentioned, when you interview people, and I think it's legitimate here when you think about supervisor management roles, is that a lot of times when you start your first job, you put on teams. Now you guys are on teams in business school every day, and you know how teams work. You have 5 people, one of them is a laggard, and you guys all get angry at. You've got other people who are trying to dominate, and then the rest in the middle. What's really important is, what I look at people, particularly, is how they operate in that team environment. Are they, that tells me what kind of manager, and more importantly, what kind of leader they will be in their future. I look for people who have ramp. They don't have all the requisite skills, but they have those innate skills that give them ramp to grow in the business. So yeah, you do take your first risk on supervisory management role, but it's really about looking at how people operate in those teams to say that is going to be a person who then can make that next jump in the level. And that's how I kind of built my career, is I mentioned it before, being uncomfortable, building that sphere of influence, and then participating where you're adding value to those teams to then allow you to get to that next level within your career.
Kevin, I like that. Brian, I got to jump in. So school is the building blocks to prepare you for the career. And all it is preparing you to have the basics, and then everything else you're brand new and you learn on your career. It's no different than soccer or hockey practice, where it's building those fundamentals, but then you're thrown in the game and you kind of figure it out. So all these skills you arrive, you're still brand new and you're a rookie once you get into Kevin, I think you're absolutely right.
I like your comment about, I had made a note about like working in groups and teams and like, how do you respond? We will often get from students like, another project, another group thing. It's like, why do you guys keep doing this? Well, we keep doing it because, they are anything that you can learn about operating functionally within the group dynamic now, okay, is just going to put you ahead of the game, later on. Because if you think in the real world, you know, you've got your laggard and your middle of the pack and you're a leader. Well, I mean, oftentimes at school, you've got, you know, 2 laggards, right? And 1 middle of the road and 1 leader, or 3 laggards and 1 leader. And it is, but they're great learning experiences, even though they may not feel like it at the time. I got a question for Liz. How do you meet the concerns of the physician and the patient while marketing, especially with specialty treatments?
Yeah, so in the rare disease space, it is very much of a niche market, and a lot of our understanding of these patients or physicians comes from extensive research. So we've done just a lot of marketing research panels with doctors to talk through what their needs are around this disease in particular. We've talked with patients and what their day-to-day looks like. So just all of that marketing intel has been able to inform a lot of our insights that lead us to a certain concept that we will bring into all of our messaging and stuff, or the tone that we bring into it.
You ever find any like conflict of interest? And I don't know if that's the right term to use, but is there always alignment between you know, patient and physician?
I think it depends on the disease and the specific area. I think with the one I'm working on in particular, it's the experience. This patient population is very educated on their disease. So oftentimes we can, the messaging for both can be very aligned, whereas in other disease spaces, doctors don't actually know what's going on a day-to-day basis with their patients. And so there is that misalignment, and that's something we have to try to solve for, to educate them or to educate the patients, to empower them to talk to their doctors about the disease.
And Brian, there's people with seats at the table. So if you think about HAE, it's a disease that costs over, you know, the treatment is 6 figures, right? You're paying over 6 figures for that drug, right? So there are other, you know, actors at the table who influence both that communication or access. You know, Liz's, you know, that drug company. Well, there may be 4 or 5 different drugs to treat HAE, and how do they get access to that process? And then, you know, looking at the supply chain, pharma manufacturers, for example, have the opportunity to go either a very broad market supply or a single supplier, so that they control the relationship both with the supplier and then ultimately some of those patients. So lots of different ways to operate in that specialty pharmaceutical market that really has multiple actors touching both the patient, the physician, et cetera.
Okay, interesting. Yes, and I mean, we talk about all those, you know, single, multiple sourcing options, risk advantages, so on and so forth. So yes, I totally hear you there. I get time to squeeze in one more question. So as we move to embracing virtual meetings with physicians and clinics and so on and so forth, any gray areas or any concerns with leveraging that technology? Are there, period? That's the question. So
I would tell you that the way we look at it is that there's still a lot of opportunity to grow that space relative to the application. I think the watch out is that it doesn't become a single event. In other words, if I'm treating a patient virtually as a physician or nurse practitioner, that they don't fall into that gap after. It's incumbent upon the healthcare system to make virtual integrated into the process rather than an event process, which is really what it has been up to date, right? Because now it's been forced in. Okay, I need to now say, okay, in my treatment pattern for whatever my healthcare needs are, this is just one component along the road of treating an individual patient.
That's an interesting point. I mean, not to go down my personal road. I mean, my father-in-law has got some health issues. Many of his appointments with his doctors over the last year have been virtual. I mean, he is he needs to get in and see some of these people face to face to get a more complete, I think, assessment like of where he is at than what we've been able to accomplish with some of these virtual things. I mean, that's an interesting point you bring up.
And Brian, just realize that we are creating what I would call point solutions, which include growing home care. So you are going to see more and more care delivered at the home than you ever saw before. You've seen Uber and Lyft engage the healthcare system to create greater access. So, and you've heard the word social determinants of health. So there are going to be significant amount of changes. COVID is just accelerating the innovation in the industry.
Okay. Yep. All right. Interesting. All right. So we have
Brian, one quick comment on that.
Greg.
So not just Kevin is the home care growing, but what we've seen is once visitation was opened up for family members, that more and more people are going to the ERs and getting what they need to be done. So there's a lot of, there's an older population of Rhode Island that weren't going to the doctors and weren't going to the hospitals. And now we have a backlog in the healthcare system that you're going to see. So surgeries are different, but even though we're not seeing people get their endo procedures and a lot of their basic things that they should. So you will see in healthcare, you're going to have more virtual, and I do with my son, and you can talk to a doctor, but there's a lot of things that you have to need to either go in person and get things taken care of. And the only other thing I've seen is we're outsourcing more and more in small areas of specialties. And I walk every part of this hospital, so the 2 hospitals, and I'm walking through the ER the other day, and there's, Roger Williams, we get a lot of the inner city, and there's a lot of different language barriers, and we have translators come in that's on a screen. It's a computer, it's a roll around, just like Stop and Shop, it rolls around and it does all the translation on a screen. I never used to see that. We used to hire translators that walk the hospitals to talk with the patient before surgery. So you're seeing more and more of these roll around, not just in surgery with a doctor, but we're seeing with patient interaction. And now we have a translation system that rolls around on wheels. So it's definitely affected the healthcare system.
Yeah. All right. Well, I want to thank our 3 panelists. We have, we're past our, deadline here by almost 5 minutes now. So Liz, thank you very much. Greg, Kevin, students appreciate your time and your insights. Ms. Finnegan, thank you so much for being technology wing person. Students, hope you enjoyed this session. Please take advantage of what is available to you for the rest of the day today. It's just going to put you in a better position to succeed, on the next path in your life. So thank you so much, everyone. Stay healthy, be safe. And again, thanks for the time.
Thank you.
Good luck, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to stop recording.
Okay.